Welcome to At Issue. Thank you so much for joining us on this first show after the start of the new year. My name is H. Wayne Wilson, and you probably don't want to hear this. After you have sated yourself with food throughout the Christmas and New Year's, we're going to be talking about food, but a different approach to food. We're going to be talking about locally grown food, and we're going to try to define that with our guests here on the program. What is locally grown food and why is it different and why might it be better? And to have that discussion, Elaine Sebald is here. Elaine is the coordinator of the Bloomington Farmers Market. Thank you for being with us on the program. Across the table is Dave Bishop. Dave is a farmer,
That's correct.
but not the traditional farmer. And we'll talk a little bit about what Prairie Earth Farm is. You're located down
Atlanta, Illinois, between Lincoln and Bloomington on I-55.
All right, and also joining us, Wes King. Wes is the policy coordinator for the Illinois Stewardship Alliance, and a one-sentence definition of the Illinois Stewardship Alliance.
Illinois Stewardship Alliance is a statewide nonprofit organization working to educate and advocate for local food systems and sustainable agriculture.
And let's talk about, he mentioned food system. We're talking about a food system.
Right.
Are we changing the food system?
Well, I think we're hoping to at least offer an alternative to the food system that seems to be prevalent these days, which is one that's high volume, highly technological, ships food long distances, and does a lot of, and also a lot of consolidation. So for example, we see fewer and fewer farmers and processing plants and companies involved in providing that food to us, and that reduces choice. Also means that a lot of times where we have the opportunity to support our own communities through food, but instead we're actually sending a lot of our money to California or Florida and supporting those communities instead. So it's kind of a missed opportunity for us.
And for viewers who were not with us last week, this is part 2 of the local food program. And last week we talked about the multiplier effect with local food, and it actually generates more funds or keeps more funds local than if you were to pay for something that was shipped in from out of country or out of state. So this industrial complex is something that you actually were part of, if I may say that, not too awfully long ago.
I started out that way back in the late 70s, early 80s when I first started farming. And through the years we just sort of evolved into where we are right now, which is a more local approach.
And you evolved. Was there something that spurred this?
I think a certain level of discomfort, certainly with the system, but also I've seen my local communities devastated by the consolidation of farms. The local community is a big part of agriculture. We depend on our local communities. And to see these kind of be torn apart was hard. And when that happens, there's something wrong with the system. And what is that?
So what do you raise currently? And you are an organic farmer?
That's correct.
Certified?
Certified organic.
All right. Before we talk about what you raise, what is certified organic?
Well, USDA certified organic is simply a standard, a published and enforced standard to which food is produced.
And to qualify, there is a process through which you go?
There is a process where you have to be inspected by a certifying agency. That's a private company that enforces the USDA government rules. You have to go through a series of paperwork, inspections, you have to keep records, you have to demonstrate that you are in fact following the rules that are set forth in the organic program.
Meaning that you use different kinds of pesticides and herbicides?
Meaning that you try to use an integrated pest management system, which instead of looking for, say, a chemical solution to a particular problem, you might choose to use a crop rotation system, different kind of crops. Diversity is kind of the basis of farming operations that are sustainable, because you use animal inputs to feed crops, crops to feed animals. The system works in a circular motion.
So you raise, excuse me for interrupting, but
no,
you go from cattle, you have vegetables?
Right. For example, the farm is divided into enterprises. The livestock enterprises produce fertility. The grain enterprise uses that fertility to produce grain, and sells grain back to the livestock enterprise. And so as you go around in a circle, maybe you might think of this as a closed loop system where all of the inputs that are used in production are being produced on the farm. We're not quite perfectly there yet, but sustainability is dependent upon developing a system where you can minimize or reduce these external inputs.
And you sell many of your goods at farmers markets.
We sell at farmers markets, we have a CSA, we have various accounts, people who come, small stores, restaurants.
And for the benefit of the audience that's new this week, a CSA is?
Community-supported agriculture. So that means that a group of people make an agreement with a farmer to buy a share of whatever he or she produces during the season, and they pay up front for that, and then they get a food basket every week for a specified period of time.
Let's turn to the government's role in this, because I think sometimes we assume that the small farmer, and you don't have that many acres, you don't have thousands of acres.
No.
And so the small farmer sometimes runs under the radar. Does the government play a role in this?
Well, I wouldn't say that they're running under the radar. A lot of times what they're doing doesn't require government intervention or government regulation. You know, if you're just growing vegetables or fruits to sell at a farmer's market, it's largely in unregulated economic interaction because it's generally seen as something that, why would you need to regulate it? You're just selling fresh, healthy, locally grown food directly from a farmer to the individual who's going to eat it or produce it. So I don't, in that sense, I don't think of it as under the radar. I think of it as being outside. It's not needed.
So it's a case of trust. I come to the farmer's market, I say, hi Dave, I really liked those tomatoes last week, I want more.
Well, the ideal situation is one in which the consumer develops a personal relationship with the person who's supplying their food. You know, we think of ourselves as healthcare providers. So when you go looking for a family doctor, you want to find someone that you can know personally, that you can have a relationship with, you can call, someone you trust, someone that you believe is competent to do that job. Well, the person who provides your food, you should have that same kind of relationship with that person. So that's the ideal situation, communication and trust with that person.
So I build up a personal relationship with him. He sells to a lot of me's that come to his market, but he's got to sell more than that. So where does he turn? I mean, he can't sell to a hospital or a grocery store. They're not going to deal with small-time Prairie Earth Farm. I don't mean that derogatorily.
We actually do sell to a hospital in Hopedale.
Oh, do you? Oh, okay, Hopedale.
Right.
Yeah,
The Rossies.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah, generally speaking, though, you're right. Buyers like that want things in volume. They have difficulties dealing with seasonality. They don't want to not get tomatoes just because it's not tomato season in Illinois. So that is a challenge, and there are efforts underway now to try to address some of that. And part of the difficulty isn't just the desires of the buyers, it's also that a lot of the infrastructure that used to support a more localized food system has been converted to something that really supports more large processing plants and shipping food long distances and all that. So one of the things we need to do in order to make things work better for farmers like Dave is to rebuild some of that infrastructure, transportation, processing, marketing, that type of thing.
You go ahead, Wes.
Well, I was going to say, and I think there's another level before getting to the institutional level, and that can be restaurants. There's a lot of restaurants, I know in Bloomington as well as in Springfield, that are working really hard to connect with farmers in the area and buying product directly from them to then serve to their customers. So it doesn't have to just be a direct farmer to a household residence interaction. You can have that where there's a lot more of these restaurants that they realize they want to use the healthiest and the freshest. Really, that's what a lot of it comes down to is.
And have you gone that route, restaurant?
Absolutely, we do sell to a number of restaurants. They like the food, but also, of course, buying local is a very hot thing to do right now, and so they like to use that as an advertising tool, and they like the idea of being able to get stuff that's not been shipped in on a truck, but literally is picked just that day or the day before.
You might be surprised at how many restaurants buy local products. A lot of them really don't make a big deal about it. And so a lot of times they, especially in this area, they seem to do that rather frequently.
So is there a way we can determine, a simple way we can find what restaurants are buying local when it comes to produce?
Well, one thing is to ask them. One thing is to ask them and to encourage them when they do, to let people know that. But, beyond that, one thing that we do at the Stewardship Alliance is we've organized what's called the Buy Fresh, Buy Local directories. These here, it's part of, we've got one for the Springfield area and one for the Bloomington area. And it's part of a marketing tool for small farmers to communicate, and restaurants to communicate with consumers about where they can get local food. It's a directory that's got a listing of all the farms in the Springfield area, what they have, what their practices are, restaurants in the area using local food. So it's a great way for consumers to find out where they can get more of that.
Is there one of those for the Peoria area yet?
There's currently not one for the Peoria area, but the Bloomington area one includes several farms that are in the Bloomington area.
And
Or in the Peoria area.
Guess who's in the Buy Fresh, Buy Local program?
We are, that's right.
Let's go back to this center, and I don't know whether we should call it a processing center. I hesitate to use that term, but that's fine. I mean, that's great to sell to restaurants and to support restaurants and Prairie Earth Farm, et cetera. But still, if you want to break into the hospital or an institution of that nature, what would this process be?
Well, there's a story, I don't know if Tara has told it already, about the farmer who wanted to
Tara
sell.
Brockman was on
Yes.
last week for the audience. Tara Brockman was here last week. So
Yes,
that's who Tara-
so did she tell the story about the farmer who wanted to sell his carrots to the local school?
No.
Yeah, well, we had a farmer who came to the Bloomington Farmers Market who grew a lot of carrots, and he found a school that was interested in purchasing his carrots and selling them to the kids. But it turned out that he could not sell them to the school because they needed them washed, peeled, and cut. A lot of schools don't have kitchen facilities anymore. So he was determined to sell these carrots, and he did some checking around to find out how he could get them washed, peeled, and cut. And the nearest place that he could find to do that was Michigan. And that obviously wasn't going to work. So he was sort of our inspiration. We said we need a way to help get even just simple things like carrots from the farmers so that we can feed them to our own children. And processing is certainly a big part of it, but you're right, that's not all there is to it. It's also, transporting it. It's doing things like, washing, peeling, cutting, but also aggregating. Another thing we're looking at is if you have an excess of produce in season, can you preserve it so that you can then use it during other parts of the year? Also a place maybe to bring people together from a community standpoint so they can learn more about cooking fresh foods.
Share best practices.
Yes, yes, education for farmers.
So how close are you?
We're not very close at this point. We're just at the beginning, and so we have visions. We're starting to build some momentum. We've got people who are interested in working with us, and right now our hope is to actually be able to open some sort of facility in 2013. We're doing some things right now. We're working with ISU, for example. We're gonna work with some farmers to see if we can deliver a small quantity of produce to them next year as a sort of an experiment.
Walk before you run.
Exactly.
Are you supportive of this, I assume?
Very much. Very much. We see that as the way that we're going to get the local food movement producing a significant percentage of the total food that's consumed in Illinois. Right now we produce only a small fraction of the total food that could be grown in Illinois here, and most of the rest of it comes from other states or other countries or who knows where. Why should we be giving away billions of dollars of local income when we could be doing those things here? So it's a matter of getting the structure and the system into place to make this happen.
One of the farmers that's participating in is a local farmer. The local food aspect is Lyndon Hartz. Lyndon has 10.5 acres. That's right, just 10.5 acres. He is a farmer, and he's outside of Wyoming, Illinois, and he raises on about 10 acres, he raises vegetables and all sorts of different foods, but he also, during the winter, raises items in what are called hoop houses. And you're going to see the interview with him inside a hoop house. Let's hear from Lyndon Hartz.
Next year, I'm planning on expanding my storage space so I can save onions, potatoes, more sweet potatoes, more squashes, garlic. I mean, even cabbages, you can pick them, and if you keep them at a certain temperature, they'll keep for a couple months without going bad. So there's a lot of things, that do store well, and that could be available all year round. For me, I don't really advertise it as much. I don't say, these are hoop house tomatoes or these are, field tomatoes or anything like that. But what you get is when you can bring, that perfect crop, from this hoop house, or you can bring, something that is supposed to be out of season by a couple weeks, but you still have it. You can draw those people to your stand, and I think that's where the benefit comes in. They might not know it comes from a hoop house, but when they taste it and they can see, how perfect it is, they can see the benefits of it. The money stays in the local economy. When you spend $1 with a farmer, it stays here. The quality of the produce is better. It's picked the day before, if not the day of, the market, whatever it is. So the nutrient levels are as high as they can be, the fresh is as high as it can be. Basically, an organic farmer doesn't use any synthetic chemical fertilizers, pesticides, or herbicides. That's kind of the basics of it. All my fertilizers are naturally based. I use a lot of fish meal and seaweed meal, which comes from fish product and seaweed. I use a lot of composted field crops that aren't good quality. I do a lot of composting and that type of thing. Pesticides are all natural. I use a lot of row covers to, deter the insects from getting onto the crops. That kind of thing. It's, all, the weeding, of course, is all hand weeding. I got a few specialized pieces of equipment that I can put on the tractor, but otherwise it's just a lot of hand weeding.
Hand weeding, do you do that?
Well, we are fortunate that we do have quite a bit of tillage equipment on the farm already, and we use field cultivators, discs, row crop cultivators, and other things like that to help reduce the amount of hand weeding.
One of the advantages you had is that you were what do you call it? Conventional farmer, as opposed to what are you now?
And I would think that I aspire to be a sustainable farmer. I would describe myself that way.
All right.
That's my aspiration.
And you do have hoop houses.
That's correct.
What advantage does a hoop house offer you other than typically, I can grow during the winter, but there aren't some crops you can't grow.
Well, the purpose of the hoop house is season extending. In other words, we'd like to get it a month earlier. We like to have tomatoes a month earlier and keep them a month later than you would if you were just operating outside. So we don't heat these. They are basically unheated,
Solar
except
heated.
by the sun, which heats them up. And they are very effective at capturing the early season and the late season price premiums.
And certain crops actually do well during the winter.
Lettuce, for example, we have a great deal of lettuce right now. My son is operating that part of the farm, and he's still harvesting lettuce, even though it's been down to 9 or something like that lately, and the lettuce is still doing fine.
And I can hear some people out in the audience going, Lyndon was harvesting, he was picking those white things, those were turnips. All right, so I just want to make sure everyone knew that. Let's turn back to government. A recent bill was passed.
Yeah, well, it's been passed by the Senate. It's the Food Safety Modernization Act, and it's been a long, complicated history with the bill. The first version of it was introduced in the House actually last summer.
Yeah, we're talking federal here.
Yes, federal level. It was introduced in the House of Representatives, and it was passed. At that time, there was a lot of concern among small farmers, local food advocates that the way the bill was written was going to create this whole new level of food safety regulations targeted towards some of the larger corporate entities. The same regulations were then going to be applied to the small farm producing for a local level. So in the process, since that House bill had passed, there's been, I'd say, a grassroots swelling of, I wouldn't want to say outrage, but concern over the potential that the bill would have on making it hard for small farmers to continue to do business. So there was a lot of negotiating done over the summer, and there was an amendment inserted into the bill called the Tester Amendment. It was proposed by John Tester. He's the senator out of Montana. He's an organic farmer. And what that was going to do, what that does, is it sets out some exemptions for small farmers producing for a certain radius under a certain dollar amount, selling directly to their customers. So it protects them from this one-size-fits-all regulatory scheme.
And so the Senate version has to go back to the House for their approval?
It's gone to the House for its approval. There's been a lot of political theater going on with the bill. At this point, it's been then passed by, it was just earlier this week, passed by the House, and they made a few changes to it, so now it has to go back to the Senate. So it's got to go through the Senate one more time before it can, if they make any small changes, it might have to go back to the House again. But the vision, or at least what I'm understanding, is that it's going to be passed and it's going to be sent to the President's desk and he will sign it.
And sufficient changes have been made so that you don't get caught under the same regulations as industrial farms?
You know, a good example is traceability, and that's a big issue. We're all concerned about food safety, whether it's foodborne illness or terrorism or whatever. We want to be able to trace this piece of food back to where it came from. And one of the big advantages of a local food system is easy traceability. If you buy a package of meat from us, you will get a package that will have our name on the label, it'll have the processor's name on the label, it'll have a lot number that traces that piece of meat to a specific animal, and the history of that animal is in our records. Now, if Congress can get more traceable than that, I'll shut up and go away. I don't think you're going to beat that system. Even if there is a problem with the local food system, it's a smaller problem. It's a more localized issue.
Let's continue the conversation about safety. Who inspects for safe operations on farms?
Well, it depends upon the type of farm.
Well, livestock would be USDA, I think.
Right. So for vegetables, unless there's some requirement from a buyer, there really aren't any government mandated inspections of vegetable farms. Correct me if I'm wrong.
No, that's correct.
So anybody could farm any vegetable produce and sell without any inspection?
There is no federal or state requirement that I'm aware of to grow vegetables on your own farm and take those vegetables to a farmer's market, assuming that you meet the local requirements there.
Health department.
Health department requirements, and sell those.
Right.
As long as they are unprocessed.
Exactly.
There is a difference between a whole tomato and a sliced tomato.
And the health department does oversee those things at
That's
the
correct.
farmer's market. They make sure that, so for example, even something as simple as bagging your lettuce qualifies it as a processed food, and then the health department is involved in that and has requirements for that. But as long as it's just, a pile of potatoes or tomatoes that haven't been cut, there really, at this point, isn't very much.
That's right.
Right.
I find that interesting that all you have to do is cut a tomato or cut a potato and all of a sudden.
Whole new set of rules.
That's
Yeah.
exactly right.
So at the Illinois Stewardship Alliance, are you actively involved at the state level now? We talked about a federal bill. Are you involved at the state level with legislation?
Yeah, we have been, especially more and more over the last year. Last spring in April, for the first time ever, at least first time ever as far as we know, organized the first ever Local Food Awareness Day at the Capitol, where we're trying to get consumers and farmers to come to Springfield to meet with their legislators, to put a personal face, to put a story to local food, to farming, so that legislators, when they're making decisions in Springfield, take this into account. Take these farmers and take the choices that some consumers have made in terms of choosing locally, choosing organic, to take those considerations into mind when they pass legislation.
A final thought, and I'll ask each of you real briefly how best do we market local food?
Relationships, I think, is the key. The idea of local foods is that people within a community, farmers, consumers, can all get together. You can talk to me, I can talk to you, how I do what I do. You can have confidence in that, or you can go to someone else if you don't have.
And real briefly, 15 seconds.
I mean, basically, I think it is about relationships, but local food also builds relationships. I can't tell you in my role how often I've connected a farmer with a restaurant, and it's a new relationship. Yeah.
Well, there are a lot of relationships that must be built at this point, I assume. And we thank you, Elaine Sebald, and we thank you, Wes King, and we thank you, Dave Bishop, for a
Thank you.
discussion on local food and where food is going in the future. And we welcome you to a new year, 2011. Thank you for joining us on At Issue. We'll be back in another week with more.